The sound of a pistol shot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Savannah Greene ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs. It was 1878, and the Wyoming Territory was no place for a woman alone, especially one who had just defied the most powerful man in town. "You can't hide forever, girl." Sheriff Donovan's voice boomed down the main street. "Come out now, and maybe I won't drag you back to your paw in pieces." Savannah pressed her back against the rough wood of the trough, the water inside sloshing gently against her trembling shoulders. Her decision had been made in a split second. When she'd seen the bloodied stranger stumble into town, she hadn't hesitated. Now she was paying the price. 3 days earlier, Savannah had been the respectable daughter of Jeremiah Greene, the town's preacher and moral compass. At 22, she was known for her kindness, her devotion to her father's church, and her skilled needlework. What she wasn't known for was rebellion. Until now, the stranger had appeared like a mirage on the horizon, his figure wavering in the heat as he stumbled down Silver Creek's main street. His clothes were tattered, his face streaked with blood and dust. No one moved to help him, not with those wanted posters plastered all over town bearing his likeness. Mason Vaughn, wanted for robbery and murder in 3 territories. But when he collapsed at the edge of town, something had compelled Savannah forward. Perhaps it was the way his eyes, clear blue despite the grime on his face, had met hers, silently pleading. Or perhaps it was simply that in all her years of listening to her father preach about the Good Samaritan, she'd never truly been tested. She had helped him to her father's small storage shed behind the church and tended his wounds. A bullet had grazed his temple, and he had a nasty knife wound in his side. He was barely conscious, but even in his delirium, he'd whispered, "They're lying. I didn't do it." "Hold still," she'd murmured, pressing a cold cloth to his forehead. "I'm not judging you." "You should," he'd replied before passing out. For 2 days she'd kept him hidden, bringing him food and fresh bandages, cleaning his wounds, and listening to his story when he was lucid enough to tell it. Mason Vaughn claimed he had been framed by Sheriff Donovan and his deputies after discovering their involvement in a stagecoach robbery that had left 3 people dead. The wanted posters were Donovan's insurance. No one would believe a wanted criminal over the respected sheriff. Savannah hadn't been sure whether to believe him until she'd overheard her father and the sheriff talking in hushed voices in the church. "The man is dangerous, preacher," Donovan had said. "If anyone's harboring him, they're endangering the whole town." "I understand, Sheriff," her father had replied. "But as I've told you, I haven't seen any strangers around the church." "Better not have. I'd hate to think what might happen to someone who helped such a villain, even if they were family." The threat had been clear, and yet, when Savannah returned to the shed and found Mason barely able to breathe, his wound infected and his body burning with fever, she couldn't bring herself to abandon him. "I need to get you to a doctor," she told him. "They'll kill me," he'd rasped. "Donovan has men everywhere. Then we need to leave town. Tonight." Now, crouched behind the water trough with the sheriff's bullets splintering the wood around her, Savannah was facing the consequences of that decision. She had managed to get Mason to the edge of town before someone had spotted them. The alarm had been raised, and she'd told him to run while she led the sheriff in the opposite direction. Her diversion had worked too well. Now she was trapped, and her father's voice had joined the sheriff's, calling her name with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Savannah, this is madness, child. Come out now and repent." Tears stung her eyes. Her father couldn't understand that she couldn't ignore a man in need, even if it cost her everything. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and Savannah closed her eyes. She would have to make a run for it. Maybe if she could reach the livery stable, she could take a horse. Suddenly, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the street. Savannah risked a glance around the trough and saw a rider charging down the main street, dust billowing in his wake. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but she would recognize those blue eyes anywhere. Mason Vaughn reined his horse to a stop between Savannah and the sheriff, his gun drawn. "That's enough, Donovan." The sheriff raised his pistol. "Well, look who decided to join us. 2 birds with 1 stone." "Let her go," Mason said, his voice steady despite the half-dozen guns now pointed at him. "She's innocent. Your quarrel is with me. She aided a criminal." Jeremiah Greene stepped forward, his Bible clutched to his chest. My own daughter betrayed this town, betrayed God's law. She saved a man who was falsely accused, Mason replied. I didn't rob that stagecoach, and I didn't murder those people. He turned to face the gathering crowd. But I know who did, and I can prove it. Sheriff Donovan's face darkened. Shoot him. Wait. Savannah jumped to her feet. Father, please listen. Mason has evidence. Letters from the stagecoach company about a shipment of gold. Letters that were in Sheriff Donovan's office the day before the robbery. That's a lie, Donovan shouted, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The letters are hidden in my saddlebag, Mason said calmly. Along with a pocket watch belonging to one of the victims, a watch that Deputy Fletcher was wearing last week in the saloon. A murmur ran through the crowd. Donovan's deputy shifted nervously, his hand moving to his vest pocket. This is nonsense, Donovan growled. He's trying to save his skin, and she's been fooled by a silver-tongued devil. Then let's see those saddlebags, called a voice from the crowd. It was Mr. Henderson, the owner of the general store and a respected figure in Silver Creek. There's nothing to see, Donovan said, his voice rising. This man is a wanted criminal. Only because you made him one, Savannah said, moving to stand beside Mason's horse. I believe him, Father. I know what I saw and heard. Jeremiah Greene looked torn, his eyes moving between his daughter and the sheriff he had trusted for years. Jeremiah, Donovan said, control your daughter or I will. Mason dismounted in one fluid motion, positioning himself in front of Savannah. You'll have to go through me first. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Savannah could feel her heart racing as she stood behind Mason, acutely aware that one wrong move could end with both of them dead in the street. Then, unexpectedly, her father stepped forward. I want to see this evidence. Preacher, you can't, Donovan began. I can and I will. Jeremiah cut him off. If my daughter is to be judged, let it be with all the facts before us. Mason nodded slowly, then reached for his saddlebag. Donovan's pistol followed his movement. Easy, Mason said. I'm just getting what you asked for. He pulled out a packet of letters tied with string and handed them to Jeremiah, who adjusted his spectacles and began to read. The crowd waited in tense silence as the preacher's eyes moved across the pages. Finally, he looked up, his face ashen. These are communications about a gold shipment, addressed to Sheriff Donovan from the Wells Fargo office in Cheyenne. He turned to the sheriff. They're dated 3 days before that stagecoach was robbed. That doesn't prove anything, Donovan protested, but his voice had lost its certainty. Mason reached into the saddlebag again and pulled out a gold pocket watch, which he handed to Mr. Henderson. Check the inscription. Henderson turned the watch over and read aloud. To Thomas Wright, with love from Elizabeth, Christmas 1875. He looked up, his expression grim. Tom Wright was one of the passengers killed in that robbery. All eyes turned to Deputy Fletcher, whose hand was still hovering near his vest pocket. I saw Fletcher wearing that watch in the Silver Dollar last week, called the bartender. Claimed he bought it off a traveler. The crowd's mood shifted palpably. Whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople, and several men who had been backing the sheriff began to step away. Donovan's eyes darted around, sensing his control slipping. With a sudden movement, he grabbed Jeremiah Greene, pressing his pistol to the preacher's head. Nobody move. I'm riding out of here, and the preacher's coming with me. Father, Savannah cried, lurching forward, but Mason caught her arm. Let him go, Donovan, Mason said evenly. You're surrounded. It's over. It's not over until I say it's over. Donovan backed toward his horse, dragging Jeremiah with him. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jeremiah, with a strength few knew the mild-mannered preacher possessed, suddenly drove his elbow into Donovan's ribs. The sheriff's grip loosened just enough for Jeremiah to twist away. Donovan, enraged, raised his pistol. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Donovan staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as blood blossomed on his chest. Mason stood with his smoking gun still raised, and beside him, Savannah was shocked to see her father holding a small derringer, his hand trembling. I always kept it in my Bible, Jeremiah said quietly as Donovan collapsed to the ground. For protection during my missionary days. Never thought I'd use it again. In the chaos that followed, Deputy Fletcher tried to make a run for it, but was quickly tackled by several townsmen. The other deputies, seeing which way the wind was blowing, surrendered their weapons without a fight. As the dust settled, Savannah found herself standing in the middle of the street, caught between her father and Mason. The town watched, waiting to see what would happen next. "Savannah," her father said, his voice weary. "You disobeyed me. You put yourself in danger." "I know, father," she replied. "But I couldn't let an innocent man die." "An innocent man?" Jeremiah echoed, looking at Mason with new eyes. "It seems I owe you an apology, Mr. Vaughn." Mason nodded respectfully. "No apology needed, preacher. I understand why you'd be protective of your daughter. Nevertheless, what she did was reckless." Jeremiah's stern demeanor returned. "The town council will have to meet about this. There will be consequences for aiding what everyone believed was a fugitive, regardless of the truth." Savannah felt her heart sink. "Father, no, Savannah. Actions have consequences, even well-intentioned ones." He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "We'll convene the council tonight. Until then, Mr. Vaughn is free to go, and Savannah, you will return home." Mason's jaw tightened. "Sir, with all due respect, your daughter saved my life. She's a hero. She broke the law as we understood it at the time," Jeremiah replied firmly. "And in this town, we follow the law." Savannah looked from her father to Mason, torn between duty and the strange bond that had formed between her and this man she barely knew. "I'll go home, father," she said finally. "But I don't regret what I did." As she walked away, she could feel Mason's eyes on her back, and something told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The town council meeting lasted well into the night. Savannah stood before them, 5 of the most influential men in Silver Creek, including her father, and told her story from beginning to end. Mason had been permitted to speak as well, providing detailed testimony about Donovan's corruption and his own innocence. But when all was said and done, the verdict was still harsh. "While we acknowledge that Mr. Vaughn was wrongly accused, and that Sheriff Donovan and his deputies were corrupt, the fact remains that you harbored someone you believed to be a criminal, Savannah," said Mr. Henderson, who was acting as the head of the council. "You kept secrets from your father and from this town. Such actions cannot go unpunished. What is your judgment?" Savannah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The council members exchanged glances before her father spoke. "You are to leave Silver Creek for a period of no less than 1 year. During this time, you may reflect on your actions and the importance of trust and community." Savannah felt as though she'd been struck. "You're banishing me?" "We're giving you time to consider the consequences of your choices," Mr. Henderson corrected. "Your father has arranged for you to stay with your aunt in Denver. And if I refuse? Then you will no longer be welcome in this town at all," her father said, his voice breaking slightly. "Please, Savannah, accept this judgment." Stunned and heartbroken, Savannah had nodded mutely and left the meeting. She had until dawn to pack her belongings and say her goodbyes. As she walked back to the small house she shared with her father, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Mason Vaughn stood in the moonlight, his hat in his hands. "I heard," he said simply. "How?" "Word travels fast." He fell into step beside her. "It's not right, what they're doing." "They're doing what they think is best for the town," Savannah replied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. "And what about what's best for you?" Mason stopped, turning to face her. "You saved my life, Savannah. You stood up for what was right when no one else would. And now I'm paying the price." She tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "That's how it works sometimes." "It doesn't have to be." Mason took her hands in his. "Come with me." Savannah blinked. "What?" "I'm heading to Colorado. I've got a small ranch waiting for me there. My uncle left it to me when he passed. It's not much, but it's honest work and a fresh start." His blue eyes were intense in the moonlight. "You need a fresh start too." "I don't even know you," Savannah whispered, though she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "You know enough to have risked everything for me," Mason replied. "And I'd like the chance to prove myself worthy of that sacrifice." Savannah looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. "They banished me for saving a stranger." Mason lifted her chin with a gentle finger, his eyes meeting hers. "Then I'll be that stranger forever," he said softly, "if you'll have me." The morning stage left Silver Creek at dawn, carrying Savannah Greene away from the only home she had ever known. Her father had embraced her stiffly before she boarded, pressing a small Bible into her hands. "Return to us when you've found your way back to righteousness," he had said. But Savannah wasn't on her way to Denver. 5 miles outside of town, the stage made an unscheduled stop, and there was Mason waiting on horseback, leading a second mount. With a racing heart and shaking hands, Savannah had changed her plans and her life in one moment of courage. They traveled south and west, keeping to lesser-known trails to avoid any pursuit from Silver Creek. Mason was careful and considerate, never pushing beyond what was proper, always making sure Savannah was comfortable during their journey. They slept in separate camps, Mason keeping watch through the night while Savannah rested. During the long days of riding, they talked. Mason told her about his life before the false accusations, how he had worked as a ranch hand since he was 15, saving every penny to someday have a spread of his own. He spoke of his uncle's ranch in Colorado, nestled in a valley with mountain views and clear streams. And he spoke of his parents, long dead, who had taught him to always stand up for what was right. In turn, Savannah shared stories of growing up as the preacher's daughter, always expected to be a model of virtue and restraint. She spoke of her mother, who had died when Savannah was 12, and the loneliness that had followed. She confessed her doubts about her father's rigid interpretation of faith and her own quiet rebellions over the years. "I used to sneak books my father would have considered inappropriate," she admitted one evening as they sat by the campfire. "Novels, mostly. Stories about people who lived differently than we did in Silver Creek." "Is that why you helped me?" Mason asked. "Because you wanted something different?" Savannah considered this. "No," she said finally. "I helped you because it was right. But maybe I came with you because I wanted something different." Mason smiled at her across the flames. "And are you finding it? This different life?" "I'm starting to," she replied. And for the first time since leaving Silver Creek, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. After 10 days of hard riding, they crested a hill, and Mason reined his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. Vaughn Ranch. It was smaller than Savannah had imagined, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, set against the backdrop of towering mountains. A creek ran through the property, its water flashing silver in the sunlight. Several horses grazed in a pasture that stretched toward distant pine forests. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It needs work," Mason cautioned. Uncle James wasn't much for maintenance in his later years. "Then we'll work," Savannah said simply. Mason gave her a searching look. "Savannah, I want to be clear about something. I invited you here as a friend, someone who needs a fresh start as much as I do. I don't expect anything from you." "I know," she said, "and I appreciate that. There's a small caretaker's cabin behind the main house. It's yours for as long as you want it. No strings attached." Savannah nodded, touched by his consideration. "Thank you, Mason." Life at Vaughn Ranch quickly fell into a rhythm. Mason worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, tending the horses, and preparing for the upcoming cattle drive. He had inherited his uncle's small herd and was determined to grow it into something sustainable. Savannah, meanwhile, took over the domestic side of ranch life. She cleaned the long-neglected main cabin until it shone, planted a vegetable garden behind the house, and even managed to tame a few chickens from a neighboring ranch for fresh eggs. She mended Mason's clothes, cooked hearty meals, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk as the sun set behind the mountains. It was a simple life, but a fulfilling one. And as the weeks passed, Savannah found herself thinking less and less about Silver Creek and more about the future stretching out before her. One evening in late summer, as they sat shelling peas together on the porch, Mason cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The main house has plenty of room. You don't need to stay in that tiny caretaker's cabin." Savannah's hands stilled. "Mason, as a proper boarder," he added quickly, "I could move into the caretaker's place. You deserve better accommodations than that cramped space." "I'm comfortable where I am," Savannah said softly. "But thank you for the offer." Mason nodded, clearly disappointed but trying not to show it. "Of course. I just wanted you to know the option was there." They continued their task in silence for a few minutes before Savannah spoke again. "When I left Silver Creek with you, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was hurt and angry and impulsive." Mason's face fell further. "I understand. If you want to leave..." "No," Savannah interrupted. That's not what I'm saying. She took a deep breath. What I mean is, I've had time to think clearly now. And I don't regret my decision. Not for a moment. Mason looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. No, no, she smiled. This place, this life, it suits me better than I ever would have imagined. And you? She paused, searching for the right words. You've been nothing but kind and respectful. You've given me space to find myself away from my father's shadow. It's the least I could do, after what you sacrificed for me. That's just it, Savannah said, setting aside the bowl of peas. I don't want you to feel indebted to me. I don't want your gratitude to be the foundation of whatever this is between us. Mason reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. It's not gratitude, Savannah. It's admiration. Respect. He paused, his blue eyes intense. And something more, if I'm being honest. Savannah's heart quickened. Something more? I've been fighting it, Mason admitted. Trying not to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. But the truth is, I think about you all the time. When you smile, it makes my whole day brighter. When you laugh, I want to find more ways to make it happen again. A warm flush spread across Savannah's cheeks. I've been fighting it too, she confessed, telling myself it was too soon, that I hardly knew you. And now, she turned her hand beneath his, entwining their fingers. Now I think I know you better than anyone. And I'm tired of fighting what feels right. Mason's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent a jolt through Savannah that made her toes curl in her boots. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the day you found me half dead in Silver Creek. Savannah laughed. Even covered in blood and barely conscious, you were thinking about kissing me? I thought you were an angel, he admitted. And then you turned out to be braver and more stubborn than any angel could be. Is that a compliment? The highest one I know how to give. As summer faded into fall, their relationship deepened. Mason began courting Savannah, properly bringing her wildflowers from his rides around the property, taking her on picnics by the creek, reading to her in the evenings from the few books they owned. They shared more kisses, each one less hesitant than the last, though Mason was always careful to maintain propriety. I want to do this right, he told her one evening as they walked back from the creek, hand in hand. You deserve to be courted like a lady, not treated like a woman who ran away with a man she barely knew. Savannah finished for him, her tone teasing. Mason grimaced. When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it was. It was an adventure, Savannah said, squeezing his hand. The first of many, I hope. You don't regret leaving your old life behind? Savannah considered this seriously. I miss my father, she admitted. Despite our differences, he was good to me in his way, and I miss some of the people in town. But I don't miss the constraints, the constant judgment, the feeling that I could never quite measure up to what was expected of me. You measure up just fine in my eyes, Mason said, pulling her to a stop and turning to face her. In fact, Savannah Greene, I think you're the finest woman I've ever known. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. Even with my scandalous past, she joked to lighten the moment. Especially with your scandalous past. Mason's smile faded into seriousness. Because if you hadn't been brave enough to defy convention, I'd be dead, and you'd still be trapped in a life that was too small for you. Savannah reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar where the bullet had grazed his temple. We saved each other, I think. Mason covered her hand with his own. Savannah, I know it hasn't been that long, but I need to ask you something. Her heart skipped. Yes. Would you consider making this arrangement permanent? Not as my housekeeper or my friend, but as my wife. Though she had begun to hope for such a question, hearing it still took her breath away. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back to Silver Creek for either of us. I've never been more sure of anything, Mason said. I love you, Savannah. I want to build a life with you, a real one, with a marriage certificate and maybe someday a family. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up to your face every morning. Tears welled in Savannah's eyes. I love you too, Mason. And yes, I'll marry you. They were wed 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher who stopped at the ranch on his circuit. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed only by their nearest neighbors and a few of Mason's ranch hands. But to Savannah, it was perfect. That night, as they lay together in the bedroom of the main house, now their home as husband and wife, Mason traced lazy patterns on Savannah's bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Savannah smiled in the darkness. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Even without your father's blessing? Without the big church wedding you probably dreamed about as a girl." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Mason Vaughn, I'd marry you in a cave during a thunderstorm if that was what it took. The blessing I care about is the one I feel in my heart when you look at me." Mason pulled her down for a kiss. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," she murmured against his lips. "But I don't mind hearing it again." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow to the mountains and cold, clear nights, Savannah found herself thinking more often of Silver Creek and her father. One evening, as they sat before the fire, she broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "I want to write to my father," she said, "to let him know I'm safe and happy." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's a good idea. He must be worried about you." "I'm not sure he is," Savannah admitted. "He might think I'm getting what I deserve for defying him in the town. He's your father. Whatever else he is, I can't believe he doesn't care about your welfare." Savannah sighed. "Perhaps you're right. I'll write to him tomorrow." The letter was difficult to compose. Savannah wrote and rewrote it several times before she was satisfied. She told her father about the ranch, about her marriage to Mason, and about the life they were building together. She didn't apologize for leaving. She couldn't bring herself to claim remorse she didn't feel, but she did express hope that someday he might understand her choices. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I do hope for understanding. I found a kind of faith here that feels truer to me than the one I was raised with, a faith in goodness, in standing up for what's right, and in the power of love to transform lives. Mason has shown me what it means to be truly accepting and supportive, and I've found strength in myself that I never knew existed." She sealed the letter and gave it to a traveling merchant who promised to see it delivered to Silver Creek. Then, she put the matter out of her mind as best she could and focused on preparing for the coming spring and the new calves that would arrive with it. Months passed with no reply, and Savannah tried not to let the silence hurt her. She threw herself into ranch life with renewed vigor, learning to ride better, helping with the cattle, and expanding her garden. By the time the snow melted from the lower pastures, she had news of her own to share. She was expecting their first child. Mason's joy was boundless. He fussed over her, insisted she rest more, and began building a cradle in the evenings after his work was done. Savannah indulged his protectiveness while quietly continuing most of her usual tasks. She had never felt stronger or more purposeful in her life. It was a perfect spring day when the rider appeared on the horizon. Mason spotted him first from the corral where he was breaking a new horse. By the time the man reached the ranch house, Savannah was waiting on the porch, one hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. The rider dismounted slowly, and Savannah's heart lurched as she recognized the stooped shoulders and silver hair. Jeremiah Greene removed his hat, his weathered face solemn as he approached the steps. "Father," Savannah whispered. "Daughter," he replied, his voice rougher than she remembered. "May I come up?" She nodded mutely, stepping aside as he climbed the porch steps. Mason appeared from the direction of the corral, his expression wary but composed. "Preacher Greene," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to our home." After a moment's hesitation, Jeremiah shook the offered hand. "Mr. Vaughn." An awkward silence fell over the three of them until Savannah gathered herself. "Please, come inside. I'll make some coffee." The main room of the cabin was warm and inviting, filled with the small touches Savannah had added over the month's curtains she had sewn, a quilt draped over the sofa, wildflowers in a jar on the table. Jeremiah looked around, taking it all in with an unreadable expression. "You've made a home here," he said finally. "Yes," Savannah replied, moving to stoke the fire in the stove. "We have. Your letter found me," Jeremiah continued. "It took some time. The merchant who carried it fell ill on the road and was delayed." Savannah nodded, relieved to know the letter had at least reached him. "I'm glad you received it." "I almost didn't come," her father admitted. "Pride is a powerful sin, and I have my share of it." "What changed your mind?" Mason asked, still standing protectively near Savannah. Jeremiah sighed heavily. Silver Creek has changed since you left. With Donovan gone and his corruption exposed, we elected a new sheriff, a good man who believes in justice, not power. He helped us see that what happened with you two was more complicated than we initially believed. And Savannah prompted. And I missed my daughter, Jeremiah said simply. When your letter came, I realized I had a choice to cling to my pride or to seek reconciliation. The good book tells us to choose the latter. Tears sprang to Savannah's eyes. I missed you too, Father. Jeremiah's gaze dropped to her midsection, where her hand still rested. I see I'm to be a grandfather. In the fall, Savannah confirmed. Around harvest time, we think. Something softened in the old preacher's face. Your mother would have been overjoyed. She would have, Savannah agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Will you stay? At least for a few days? Jeremiah looked between her and Mason, who had moved to stand beside his wife. If I'm welcome. You are, Mason said firmly. Any family of Savannah's is family of mine. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jeremiah asked about their life on the ranch, their plans, their hopes for the future. He listened more than he spoke, occasionally nodding or asking a thoughtful question. After dinner, as Savannah cleared the plates, he addressed Mason directly. You've taken good care of my daughter. I've tried, Mason replied. Though truthfully, sir, she takes pretty good care of herself. And me? Jeremiah chuckled, a sound Savannah hadn't heard in years. That sounds like my Savannah. Strong-willed from the day she was born. Like her father, Savannah commented as she returned to the table. Perhaps, Jeremiah conceded. I want you to know something, both of you. The town council met again, several months after you left. In light of everything that happened with Donovan, they voted to rescind your banishment, Savannah. You're welcome back in Silver Creek, should you ever wish to return. Savannah exchanged a glance with Mason before replying. Thank you for telling us, Father. But this is our home now. This is where we belong. Jeremiah nodded, as if he had expected this answer. Then perhaps an old preacher might visit from time to see his grandchild grow up. We'd like that very much, Mason said, reaching for Savannah's hand. Wouldn't we, love? Very much, Savannah agreed, squeezing his fingers. This is a place of new beginnings, Father. For all of us. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Savannah stood on the porch with Mason's arm around her waist and her father beside them. The future stretched before them like the vast Colorado sky, full of possibility, of joy, of love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. They banished me for saving a stranger, she murmured, leaning her head against Mason's shoulder. He pressed a kiss to her hair. And I'll be that stranger forever, he replied, just as he had promised all those months ago. Forever and always.